There is a list, an ancient list. 7 wonders, 7 monuments to what human hands are capable of. 6 of them left traces, ruins, foundations, something to point to and say here. But the 7th, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, left nothing at all. The Great Pyramid still stands. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, foundations found beneath the harbor. The Temple of Artemis, excavated, 1 column still standing. 6 of the 7 wonders left something behind. 1 did not. And that silence has haunted historians for 2,000 years. Ancient buildings leave traces, foundations, water channels. Royal projects leave inscriptions. The Hanging Gardens were supposed to be one of the greatest engineering achievements ever built. Its footprint should have been immense. At Babylon, there is nothing. That silence is not an absence. It is a clue. Diodorus Siculus described vaulted terraces rising to the height of the city walls, each level bearing trees, watered by engines lifting water from the river. Strabo described a water screw raising liquid to the upper terraces. Multiple writers, independent sources, all describing the same technical details. Consider the engineering. Tons of water lifted daily against gravity. Mature trees sustained on elevated terraces in a desert. Permanent waterproofing across every level. Mechanical systems running without interruption. This was not a garden. It was an industrial installation disguised as paradise. For 2,000 years, one story dominated. Nebuchadnezzar II, conqueror of Jerusalem, builder of Babylon, constructed the most extraordinary garden the ancient world had ever seen. Not for power, not for the gods, for love, for his queen, who was slowly dying in the wrong landscape. Amethyst of Media, raised in green forested highlands, cool air, running water, mountain pine. Carried by political alliance to Babylon, breathtaking power, breathtaking flatness. No mountains, no forest, just dust. The king watched his queen grieve for a landscape, and decided to build it. It is one of the most beautiful stories in ancient history, and it may be entirely wrong. Not because it is too romantic, but because when you place it against the actual evidence, it collapses completely. And the evidence, followed honestly, leads somewhere no one expected. Nebuchadnezzar documented everything. Walls, temples, canal work, restorations of lesser buildings. His inscriptions are extensive and proud. He describes his brickwork, his divine favor, his palace materials, and yet one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world he never mentions once. A king who records a drainage canal does not forget to record the most spectacular structure he ever built. A king who describes his brickwork does not forget the living mountain he raised for his queen. The silence is specific, shaped. It means the gardens were never his to record. Babylon has been excavated for over a century. Robert Koldewey searched the site from 1899 to 1917, specifically looking for the Hanging Gardens. He found no water-lifting infrastructure, no waterproofing, no foundations consistent with elevated terrace gardens. A century of searching, no answer from the ground. The daily administrative records of the Babylonian court survive. They log labor, water, materials. Maintaining those gardens would have consumed enormous resources every single day. None of it appears anywhere in the Babylonian record. 3 silences, building records, archaeology, administration, all pointing the same way. Multiple Greek and Roman writers described the Hanging Gardens with specific, consistent, technical detail. The level of agreement suggests they are drawing from real information about a real place. And yet at Babylon, nothing. No record, no archaeology. No trace, a wonder the ancient world described, that Babylon knew nothing about. Then came Stephanie Dalley of Oxford University, not a sensationalist, a serious philologist and historian of the ancient Near East, one of the few people who could read the primary sources in their original languages and follow the evidence wherever it led. Regardless of what the tradition expected, the evidence led her not to Babylon, not to Nebuchadnezzar, not to any version of the story tradition had told for 2,000 years. It led to Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, several hundred miles to the north, and to a king who ruled nearly a century before Nebuchadnezzar was born. His name was Sennacherib, king of Assyria, 705 to 681 BC, the man who rebuilt Nineveh into the largest city on earth, who besieged Jerusalem, recorded in both the Hebrew Bible and his own inscriptions, and who, according to Dalley's analysis, actually built what the ancient world called the Hanging Gardens. Sennacherib's own royal inscriptions describe extraordinary gardens at Nineveh, in terms that, placed beside the Greek accounts, match with precision very difficult to explain as coincidence. A paradise garden, plants from across the known world, mountain water through an aqueduct, terraced levels rising above the city. His words, his garden. Here is the critical detail. Sennacherib describes a bronze water screw for raising water to the upper garden levels. Strabo describes the exact same device in his account of the Hanging Gardens. Same function, same material, same purpose, the same specific technology in both an Assyrian inscription and Greek accounts centuries apart. The same structure. And the physical archaeology confirms it. Sennacherib built a massive aqueduct, the stone bridge at Jerwan, carrying mountain water miles to Nineveh. It still exists, excavated, studied, physical water infrastructure delivering exactly what the Hanging Gardens required. The infrastructure the gardens needed was built by the man who built the gardens. Carved into the walls of Sennacherib's palace, stone relief showing trees on elevated terrace structures, water in structured channels, gardens rising at multiple levels above a cityscape, made by craftsmen who lived at Nineveh, who saw the gardens, the only surviving visual record of what the ancient world called the Hanging Gardens, for independent lines of evidence. Sennacherib's inscriptions matching the Greek accounts, the identical water screw in both sources, a physical aqueduct at Nineveh consistent with the garden's needs, stone relief showing the terraced gardens themselves, all for pointing to Nineveh. Not one equivalent line exists at Babylon. The paradox dissolves. No trace in Babylonian records, because the gardens were never in Babylon. No archaeology at Babylon, because the evidence is at Nineveh. Why do Greek descriptions match Sennacherib's inscriptions so closely? Because they describe the same structure, the same screw, the same terraces, the same mountain water. If the gardens were at Nineveh, how did they become the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? How does a wonder migrate from one city to another across 25 centuries? The answer begins in 612 BC. It begins when the greatest city on earth was erased completely in a single military campaign. In 612 BC, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes destroyed Nineveh so completely that within 2 generations, Greek travelers passed near its ruins without identifying what great city had once stood there. The largest city in the world, unrecognizable in 200 years. Its stories homeless, its wonders unclaimed. When a city is destroyed that completely, its stories survive but lose their anchor. The memory of Sennacherib's garden survived. His name did not travel with it. By the time that memory reached Greek writers several generations later, what remained was only the image, a great terraced garden, a great eastern city, a great eastern king. To Greek writers, the ancient Near East was a single domain of exotic eastern power. The distinction between Assyrian Nineveh and Babylonian Babylon was not carefully maintained by writers working centuries later from imperfect sources. The more famous name, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, absorbed the achievement of the less familiar name, Sennacherib of Nineveh. Then the romantic elaboration arrived. A king building paradise for his homesick queen, emotionally resonant, narratively perfect. Once that story attached itself to Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, the tradition hardened around it like amber around an insect, beautiful, preserved, and encasing something. That was never quite true. Stephanie Dalley published her argument in 1994, 30 years later, still not in the textbooks. Not because the evidence is weak, because revising one of the 7 wonders means admitting that classical sources transmitted a fundamental error for 2,500 years. Institutions do not make that admission easily. 2,500 years. Wrong king, wrong city, wrong country. The error predates Rome. It predates Christianity. It predates Islam. Repeated in ancient textbooks, medieval encyclopedias, Renaissance histories, and 21st century Wikipedia articles. The correction, 30 years old, is still filtering through. To understand why Nineveh could house a wonder of the world, understand what Nineveh was. At its peak, the largest city on earth, larger than Athens, larger than Memphis, a city of 150,000 people when most settlements numbered in the hundreds, capital of an empire that had conquered Egypt and held the ancient world in its grip. Sennacherib called his city the city without equal. His palace walls were lined with carved stone reliefs depicting his campaigns in such detail that modern historians can trace individual military routes from the scenes depicted. This was a builder who thought on the grandest possible scale, for whom the impossible was the next project. Sennacherib besieged Jerusalem in 701 BC, recorded in both the Book of Kings and his own Taylor Prism inscription now in the British Museum. 2 independent accounts, 1 event. This is one of the most precisely documented moments in all of ancient history. Sennacherib was not legend. He was undeniably, documentably real. Imagine approaching Nineveh from the flat Assyrian plain. Brown horizon in every direction. And above the city, a mass of living green. Impossible, defiant, fragrant from a distance. Ascending through the terraces, leaf shadow, running water, mountain soil in desert air. Trees from lands you would never visit. Paradise built by engineering and will. The prophet Nahum predicted Nineveh's destruction before it came. He described passers-by who would one day look at the ruins and ask where the great city had gone. He was right. Xenophon led his march past the ruins in 401 BC and could find no one who could name what great city had once stood on those silent mounds. The greatest city on earth, forgotten within 200 years of its fall. Its stories survived, distorted, unmoored, drifting south until they found a new home with the more famous name of Babylon and the more familiar figure of Nebuchadnezzar. And there the misattribution settled, comfortable, unchallenged for 2,500 years. Today the site of ancient Nineveh lies beneath the modern city of Mosul, over 1 million people. The ancient mounds rise within the urban fabric, surrounded by streets and buildings. A comprehensive excavation of the full site, the kind that could definitively locate the Hanging Gardens, has never been carried out. The answer may be in the ground. The ground is not accessible. Political instability, active conflict, jurisdictional disputes, limited funding. The combination has made comprehensive excavation impossible for decades. Iraqi archaeologists have worked under extraordinary difficulty, but the scale of investigation a wonder deserves remains beyond what current conditions allow. Every year without excavation is a year in which evidence is lost. In 2015, the Islamic State deliberately destroyed the Nineveh archaeological site. Carved stone reliefs from Sennacherib's palace, surviving for 1,000 years, were attacked with sledgehammers. Some destroyed, some smuggled onto the black market. Evidence relevant to the question of the Hanging Gardens made permanently unknowable. History turned irreversibly dark. And yet the site has not been destroyed. These destruction targeted the visible surface. The great majority of ancient Nineveh has never been touched by a modern instrument. It lies buried, protected by meters of accumulated overburden. The buried foundations, the water channels, the structural remains, patient and intact, waiting for conditions that do not yet exist. The ruins of Nineveh have survived every empire that came and went since Sennacherib died. Babylon, Persia, Alexander, Rome, the medieval caliphates, the Ottoman centuries, modern conflict, everything. Still there, still waiting. The answer to where the Hanging Gardens actually stood may be lying undisturbed in the ground beneath Mosul right now. The Hanging Gardens are a case study in the fragility of ancient knowledge. Sources created by writers working from oral traditions, second-hand accounts, sources already generations removed. Each layer of transmission introduced distortion, geographic confusion, familiar names substituted for unfamiliar ones. The confident historical statement masking the uncertain chain beneath. Ancient history is presented with confident specificity that the underlying evidence often does not support. Dates stated as facts that are estimates. Attributions stated as certainties that are inferences. The Hanging Gardens have been taught as settled fact for 2,000 years. They were wrong for all of it. Confident. Repeated. Wrong. The Hanging Gardens were not just an engineering wonder. They represented the deepest ambition of civilization, the refusal to accept what nature provides. To take a desert and make it a mountain. To take a flat plain and fill it with distant highland forests. To insist that human will and knowledge can create an alternative world. They were a proof of what civilization dares to attempt. The misattribution has not changed the wonder. The gardens were real. The engineering was real. The visual spectacle was real. These things do not become less extraordinary because we searched in the wrong city for 2,000 years. If anything, the misattribution deepens the wonder, makes it richer, more complex, more remarkable, that it survived its own forgetting. The truth was not recovered through dramatic excavation, not through a buried inscription that named the gardens definitively, but through careful reading, in 1994, of sources available to scholars for decades. The inscriptions were always there. The aqueduct was always there. The reliefs were always there. It required someone to read them correctly without 2,000 years of assumption pressing down. The assumption that the gardens were in Babylon meant that their absence was treated as a puzzle rather than a signal. It made the evidence at Nineveh invisible because no one was looking for it. The most dangerous assumption is the one so embedded in tradition that it no longer feels like an assumption at all. It feels like fact. This is how history works when it works well, not through comfortable repetition of familiar stories, through rigorous willingness to look again at what we think we know, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. Sennacherib built something extraordinary. It was misattributed for 2,500 years. Dali gave it back its correct name. That is scholarship. Somewhere in the ground beneath Mosul, the physical evidence may still exist. Buried foundations, ancient water channels, structural remains of the stone vaulting, chemical signatures of mountain soil in desert earth. Archaeological evidence buried in stable conditions survives millennia. The question is not whether it is there. The question is whether we will ever be able to reach it. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world remains lost, not because it never existed, but because for 2,000 years, for 25 centuries of searching and debate, we looked in the wrong place. The gardens were always in the north, always in Nineveh, always in the ground where Sennacherib planted them, and the fall of his city buried them. For more ancient mysteries and hidden histories, stories buried beneath the surface of what we have been taught, subscribe and keep exploring, because sometimes the greatest discoveries are hiding not underground, but in the assumptions we have never thought to question. Until next time, stay curious.